Okay, welcome to the last chapter in our course. This is chapter 16. For those of you taking the 16-week class, this will be your third month. For those of you in the 8-week, we're coming into your fourth month on the 16-week. We're coming into the end here of your 8-week cycle. And this is, in many ways, a catch-all chapter. It's got a few things that I guess they didn't integrate into either the courts or the police or the corrections or the juvenile or the beginning. But it's among the most interesting chapters, and I think it's quite enjoyable, and I hope you're going to appreciate this chapter. So a few questions to ask. When a new system develops, like the cyber world, the legal system is slow to react to it. So I think it's fair to ask, do we need new jurisdictional rules and maybe even a new system to deal with this whole cyber world? Because I think what we're trying to do very often is create analogies in the law. Like an email is like a physical letter. Facebook is like a newspaper. And I'm not sure that those things go together. I'm not sure that they fit neatly into our system, and perhaps we have to take a more systematic approach to create a whole new body of law for the internet. If the government abuses power against groups, who are the most likely victims and who are the most likely benefits? So when the government misbehaves, we can ask, because we're going to talk about liberty and freedom here, who benefits and who suffers? Who is the typical victim? Who is the typical person rewarded? What are indirect injuries and deaths, and why are they treated so differently than those caused directly? So aren't indirect injuries caused by rational thought? More so than those that happen spontaneously? So shouldn't they, indirect injuries such as if you intentionally don't put in a safety device on a machine and it injures someone, isn't that worse than a snap of the moment decision to hit someone? So these are all questions I think we can fairly ask. All right, first we're going to start off with cybercrime. And to some extent, I think it's fair to say that there's nothing new under the sun. Most cyber crimes have analogies, if not exact parallels, inside the regular law. But a cyber crime is defined as a crime that occurs by or with or using the internet and or computers. And as I said, most are not new crimes. These are crimes that are facilitated by the internet or by computers. So, defamation has always existed. Fraud has always existed. Harassment has always existed. But computers and the internet allow it to be done in different ways. One of the things that the cyber world allows us, strangely enough, is both anonymity. You can do things and people don't know who you are, but conversely, a lack of privacy. And these are seemingly, diametrically opposed, but strangely enough, two big components of the system. Often, I think it's also fair to say that my generation, and I'm old, we'll say, older lawmakers and those in power have less understanding of the cyber world than young people. And that's because growing up in their formative years, computers were something that was removed. I mean, computers certainly existed when I was growing up, but these were things that were run by professionals, that were very large, they were out of your house, certainly not in your phone. And when you grow up in that environment, by the time you obtain political power, you're unfamiliar with the newest part of technology. And I think this is one of the problems we're having here. Okay, so an easier path to crime. One of the things the internet allows is force multiplying for both attacks and for risk. So it allows individuals to remain anonymous. It allows individuals to multiply their power at times. Let's give a quick example. In the 1970s, when we're talking about child pornography, which I think we'll all robbery is a horrific crime, there were perhaps about 250 child porn magazines. And these were sometimes quite crude, sometimes a little bit more sophisticated, but you can see how these were easier to track. Someone had to have a physical facility where they created the magazine itself. Much less, okay, you have to take pictures of the child or a motion picture of the child. Then you have to develop it. Then you have to market it, essentially. You have to create the object and send the object out physically to different locations. And all these are going to be weak points that can be tracked by law enforcement. By 2021, this has changed. First of all you really need to distribute child pornography is to be able to take the images, and even there, maybe you can simply create images. You can use computer technology to create cyber images of child porn. And that raises a really interesting question, I think. Is it still pornography if you are depicting a child in a sexual position, but there's no child? But you can create an image. Let's suppose you do create an image. You do film a child having sex or someone having sex with a child. As opposed to the 1970s, you don't have to get that film developed. You don't have to print out copies of that, bind them in a magazine, ship the magazine places, sell the magazine. You can disseminate it online. So there's greater anonymity and greater range and spread here. Cyber trespass is the unauthorized use or entry of a computer system, and this is something that we've seen a lot of. Again, not necessarily a completely new crime, but one that computers have given a new twist to. So there's things like malware, which is either worms or viruses or trojans or botnets that can infest systems and take information. And sometimes this is done by people spying on other people. Sometimes it's companies spying on other people. Sometimes it's foreign countries. Then, quite perniciously, and this is a relatively new, is ransomware. And this is a program that gets into a computer system and locks the files with a threat that all these files will be deleted unless a payment, an anonymous payment hopefully, is made. So what's the future of all this? Well, clearly more of us, including businesses, are using the internet, using computers. In fact, most modern business can't function without it. And more money and businesses are involved in this. So malware and hacking are evolving at individual, at group, and national levels. Individuals are trying to exploit it illegally, groups are trying to exploit it illegally, and whole countries are trying to exploit it illegally. Cyber deception and theft. One of the things that we see is fraud, where someone comes out and they say, okay, well, this statement is true about this product. I have a cure for cancer, or I have a cure for the COVID virus. And you give an online description, and maybe you sell that product. And of course, that product doesn't cure cancer or doesn't cure COVID. And this is fraud. Now, you can reach a lot of people using the internet, whereas in the, 200 or 300 years ago, you had to get a covered wagon, you drive around and you sell your snake oil, supposedly. You sell, mainly it was alcohol they sold. You sell this claiming it cures everything. Now you can sit at your desk and create this. There's also cyber theft, where you can steal people's identities, you can steal people's information, their account numbers, you can try to steal passwords, you can create fake emails, which claims to be a trusted source in order to get information. It's called phishing. Phishing really is what it's called. Okay, the thing I want to emphasize here, and I think this is a really important part, let's look at the value of the top 500 companies in the United States. What did they own that gave them value? So in 1975, if we looked at the top 500 people, or 500 corporations in America. And we said, okay, Exxon or IBM or General Motors, where do they get their value? It was mainly from tangible assets, things they owned. So GM would own a factory. IBM would own computers, actual objects. And more than 85% of that, 83%, excuse me, in 1975 were tangible assets, and only 17% were intangible. Now, intangible is something you can't touch, taste, smell, but it represents something else. A quick example of an intangible would be a patent, or a program, or an idea. It's not something that it has a separate corporeal existence. Now you notice what happens between 1975 and 2020, these statistics flop. And today, if you look at the top corporations in America, the top 500, most of their value is not what they own. It's not the factories they own. It's the ideas that they own. So Apple is a valuable corporation, not because it has a factory in China. It's a valuable corporation because it owns the idea of the iPhone, that they and they alone can market it. Cyber violence. We have cyberbullying, and of course this is not necessarily new, but again, you have more things to do, more ways to do it. And this can be sending repeated hurtful messages, and you can do it by text, by tweet, by email, particularly on social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, however you want to do it. And in extreme cases, this cyberbullying has actually led to suicides. It has led to particularly young people taking their lives or hurting themselves because of these attacks. You also have cyber stalking. Now, obviously, the physical crime of stalking would be following someone. But cyber stalking can be a little bit different, a little bit more difficult to detect. There's different ways to do this. But it also can be a precursor to actual physical violence and physical contact. Cyber terrorism. So if we go to an example of what I would call blowback, one of the things is that different countries have created different techniques to penetrate other countries, get information from them, sometimes destabilize them. One of the most famous examples is the United States, in conjunction with Israel, created a program that was able to infiltrate the Iranian nuclear weapons program. In particular, one of the ways in which you refine uranium to the point that you can use it in nuclear weapons is you spin it in a centrifuge. And these centrifuges are pretty complex machines, and they are monitored by computers. Well, the United States and the Israelis developed a program to break in and to essentially trick these centrifuges into believing they were okay, but actually to destroy themselves. Okay, well, you might say that's not necessarily terrorism if the Iranians were doing it an opposite, but here's the thing. Once that program existed, people took that program and modified it, and now they started doing things like, well, we're going to use this same program, remodified, redrawn, to break into power plants and shut them down, or to break into hospitals. So terrorism can be a direct attack like that, or it can be the way you recruit, you plan, you publicize, you gain support or gain acknowledgement for your organization. You know, famously, the Islamic State, Daesh, had a pretty robust cyber presence. Cyber attacks can be made against individuals, against organizations or governments. Cyber recruiting often begins at very innocuous sites and can lead to steady levels of radicalization. This is how QAnon had worked, and also how different right-wing reactionary groups and some left-wing groups work as well. How do you fight this? Well, one of the ways you protect data is you encrypt it, and this is kind of both a race and a balancing act. You can limit access to computer information. So you can put a firewall, or you can put restricted access. Now the problem with that is the more you restrict access to information, the less use you get out of that information. Also, the greater protection you put on something, the more illegal things can be hidden behind it. So quick example, I might have used my iPhone to commit a crime, but I have a password and an encryption on it. Well, now law enforcement wants to see that iPhone, but I won't give it up. I won't give up the code. So you can see how encryption can both protect you from crime and facilitate crime. Now, regulating the internet. The backbone of the internet was developed in the United States, but it doesn't physically exist in the same way that a bank does or a home does. So jurisdiction is a very tough issue here. And when you're trying to regulate the internet, one of the problems is you might say, well, we're not going to allow this on the internet. And, you know, the response from a criminal or the person that doesn't agree with that will be, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to host it in a site over here, and that's not in your country. How are you going to get to that? You're going to block it coming into your country? You're going to build your own separate internet, which some countries like Iran famously have tried to do. Law enforcement and cybercrime. Of course, as much as there's a lag generationally between the people that are making the law and dealing with the law, so you have old people. I was just reading that Senator Grassley, I believe, is 88 years old and is going to run for re-election to the United States Senate. So he'll be in his 90s when he finishes his term. If he gets elected, he can be easily 94 or 95 and still be a senator. Now, of course, you know, 88 right now, which really means that, you know, he was born in the 1940s. He was born when Nazi Germany still existed, when there were no computers outside of very primitive, very, very large computers used in warfare. And of course, he's living in an age where you have the computing power of the Apollo space capsules in the palm of your hand, in your phones. Now, I mention this because that's a problem, but there's also a problem with law enforcement catching up with cutting-edge technology. If this is a youth-driven field, if the younger you are, the more integrated you are into this world, then it becomes hard for older organizations and older individuals in organizations to keep up. And they need to keep up because of cyber forensics and cyber investigations. So cyber forensics is the application of computer technology to find and utilize evidence of cyber crimes. Also, what we have to understand, and I tell my clients this, is that you swim in a digital sea. When you get up in the morning and you check your phone, you're leaving a digital footprint. When you stop and get a cup of coffee at Starbucks, you're leaving a digital footprint. When you stop at the ATM, maybe for whatever reason, to get some money, you've got a footprint. When you log into your phone, when you get where you're going, you've got a footprint, a digital footprint. So this can all be tracked. Cyber investigations, you need these skills to do this beyond traditional law enforcement skills like fingerprinting or ballistics even. And the smaller or regional law enforcement is often ill prepared for this. They just don't have the expertise. Then we have jurisdictional problems. Most of the law, criminal law, is based on jurisdiction. Did the crime physically occur in this location, in Raleigh, North Carolina, or in Asheville, North Carolina, or in Charleston, South Carolina, or in New York City? But often when you're talking about a cyber crime, individuals are not physically present. They can be out of state. They can even be out of the country. And extradition laws, getting people from other countries, are very antiquated. Some countries don't view an act as a crime, but other countries would. So, you know, let's suppose you had someone in China who was against the Uyghur imprisonments. In China today, the Chinese central government has imprisoned large numbers of ethnic Muslims called Uyghurs. Let's suppose the Chinese government doesn't necessarily want anybody talking about this or displaying these images. Let's suppose you were running a site in California and you started posting images of this that you'd smuggled out. Well, the Chinese might say, well, we want to extradite this person to China and try him. And you'd say, well, no, I live in the United States and there's freedom here, or freedom to publish what I want. We got the First Amendment. So there you'd have a jurisdictional problem. Now you might say, well, yeah, that's perfectly okay, but flip this problem. Let's suppose you're someplace where the age of consent is quite young. Suppose it's 10 or 12. Or 12. Let's pick a number that clearly we would make illegal. And I'm running a site in one of these countries, child brides. And American says, well, you need to shut that site down. People don't need to be seeing images of child brides. And they would say, well, it's legal in my country. And there's your jurisdictional problem, in a nutshell, with a bit of exaggeration. All right, let's talk a little bit about security versus liberty here. The famous quote, even though it's taken out of context from Benjamin Franklin, is, those who give up a little freedom in hopes of a little security will get neither nor deserve neither. So you won't get either your liberty or your freedom, and you don't deserve it. Now that's actually taken a little out of context. But the question often becomes, how far should the government go? How far should we let the government go in investigating, monitoring, and intruding into the cyber world? Now traditionally there were very few limits placed if the government said it was a national security issue. But of course the question was, who got to define if it was national security of the government? So a lot of things that you might say, well, that's really not national security. The government said, oh yes it is. So it can be monitoring foreign governments, it can be monitoring foreign organizations that are terrorist or organized crimes, even foreign individuals, even Americans overseas, you can claim. So we have famously FISA, which is the Foreign Intelligence Service Act. This was passed all the way back in 1978. And the interesting thing it did was it created a secret court. It created the FISA court. And if the government wanted to wiretap, first of all, they had the authority, if they needed to do this without a warrant and apply for the warrant after the fact. So don't worry that, oh, there's a lot of red tape here. The government could apply for a warrant when it wanted, even if it already put one wiretap in for monitoring it. Between 1979 and 2006, we don't know the individual cases, but we know the raw numbers. There were 22,990 applications for warrants to tap people's phones, read their emails, basically cyber spy on them. 22,985 were approved, which means just 5 out of roughly 20,000 were denied. Now, there's clear evidence that the government is exceeding its authority here. But the question is, do we want to act on it? In 2001, we had the passing of the Patriot Act. Now, this was in part in response to 9/11, and allows the government to issue so-called national security letters to get access to phone records, calls, electronic communications without court orders, again, when they simply can claim it's national security. So you might think, well, my bank records, my financial records, my travel records, what flight I booked with Southwest, that's all protected. No, it's not. It's not according to the Patriot Act. In 2008, FISA was revised to give the government even more power to monitor quickly. And what began to develop was metadata collection. And huge data service farms, huge server farms were created to allow the government to store tons and tons of information. And in 2013, Edward Snowden revealed that the NSA and the FISA had monitored the data of about 113 million Americans, which if you look at the adult, that's 50% of all adults. And they looked at general data and they looked for patterns of terrorist behavior. Now, to give a crude analogy, which just so you can focus in your mind, it'd be like this. It would be like if the government kept every email that was ever sent. and then it ran a record search so that anybody in email said bomb or blow up. Okay, and those emails would be red flagged. And then we would try to determine, well, was it, someone just saying, oh, that was the bomb last night, really enjoyed it. Okay, we can discard that. We're not even going to read that one. Or is it like they keep talking about bomb, 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 bridge, 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 terror, 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 kill, kill, kill. Okay. Again, you're not doing it as a warrant. You're just gathering this stuff up, doing a data collection, and then you're drilling down on it. It appears that the courts recognize no expectation of privacy with internet service providers or telephone companies. Now, most of this relies on a very old decision called Smith versus Maryland. And again, I think this is the problem, where you have these old decisions that were framed before with this new world we live in, which allowed gathering phone numbers from suspects' houses. So you could do that without warrant. Now, you might think, well, hopefully T-Mobile won't turn my records over to the FBI just because it's a Wednesday. Unfortunately, these companies will cooperate with most warrantless searches. Mouth runners versus known wolves. There is no expectation of privacy from the First Amendment if you materially support terrorists. Most people who are initially monitored are just people who are talking crud on the internet. However, those are mouth runners. Known wolves are more dangerous. And of course, you may have people that start talking smack and then it evolves into a serious. They may be radicalized. So the question is, can I search out every one of the mouth runners, everyone who is running their mouth about possible violence? Can I put them on a list? Can I then monitor them more intently? Do I need a warrant for any of this? And you're having a real debate here. I think it's more behind the curtain than anywhere else about free speech. Can I say things without the government watching me 24/7? And this doesn't, pick a group you like or a group you don't like. I don't care. I guess right now, since we're kind of in the middle of the January 6th investigations, you had a group of people that stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Okay. A lot of those people are probably mouth runners. A lot of those people are probably people who just got online and talked smack about it. They probably weren't even there. But some of them were probably people that were there, and maybe it was some of those people that hurt some of the police officers in the Capitol. So some of them would be mouth runners, some would be known wolves. Can we track every mouth runner to find the known wolves? Can we spy on everybody to find the guilty? All right, let's move on to white-collar crime. Most crime, even though it's a lot of what we focused on this semester, is not violent crime, or crime that occurs in the street, or crime that occurs with force. It's far easier to steal money with a pen, or a tablet, I guess, nowadays, than it is to steal with a gun. The FBI estimates that a minimum of $300 billion is stolen in white-collar crime. And that basically is people in positions of authority or power or influence taking money. So in 2018, there were 5,250 workers who died by traumatic injuries at work. And many of those deaths can be directly traced to a desire to maximize profits. So quick example, let's suppose I'm running a coal mine. And in a coal mine, you have to leave a certain number of pillars to support the mine. Well, each one of those pillars can be removed and a little bit more money made. So there are standards as to how many you can have to support the roof and how many you have to leave, how many you can take. Well, if an employer takes out more than he should and maximizes his profit, some of those coal mines are going to collapse, and they have. And some of the coal miners are going to die, and they have. Well, now the question becomes, who do you prosecute? You can find the company, all well and good, but what about the person who made the decision to take out that support pillar? What about the person who said, make more money, I don't care how you do it? Those people, at best, are going to be sued civilly. a quick example of how serious this is. Air pollution in the United States kills on average about 60,000 people per year. And one of the things that corporations routinely do, and individuals who pollute routinely do, is avoid air conditioning controls because it costs money. And the more they can avoid, they might say, well, I'm only contributing a little bit of air pollution, but if 1 million people contribute a little bit, now we won't have 60,000 dead, we'll have 80,000 or 100,000 dead. And the problem is these are often anonymous victims. And remember, one of the things that makes a crime enforceable is a sympathetic victim. Now, of course, individual fraud can also kill. An example would be in 2016, Alpha Diagnosis faked X-ray readings. They said they did things they didn't. Again, typically not a criminal prosecution. So how does white-collar crime work? Well, it does it by deception, it does it by abuse of trust, it does it by concealment and conspiracy. The victims can be individuals, but very often they're groups of people, and they don't lose a lot of money as an individual, but a little bit over a lot of people or over a lot of time. Quick example. If a cell phone company charged a access fee that it didn't have a right to charge, and it was just 10 cents on your bill, you'd never look at that and say, well, I'm not going to pay that 10 cents. You just, okay, so my bill isn't $51.38, it's $51.48 this month. I don't care, it's 10 cents. All right, well, if that's an illegal charge, that's a technique of white-collar crime. You're going to get millions, if you've got millions of subscribers paying you 10 cents a month, right? Let's suppose you have 10 million subscribers. 10 cents a month is $1 million. In a year, you're going to make $12 million that you stole from people. The individual people, the consumers, don't care that much. It's 10 cents or $1.20 in a year, but it's big money to you. Common white-collar crimes: embezzlement, tax evasion, credit card fraud, mail-in wire fraud, security fraud, bribery, consumer fraud, insurance. So embezzlement, of course, you take money that doesn't belong to you, that's been entrusted to you. Tax evasion, you know, the estimates are, because we don't do a lot of audits anymore, that there's at least $100 billion from people that make more than $1 million a year that they're not paying. Credit card fraud, mail wire fraud, all these exist as crimes. All right, so regulatory system justice. Regulations are government-issued rules that have the impact of law, and there's different agencies that exist here. The Consumer Product Safety monitors consumer goods to see they're safe. The EPA monitors the environment. FDA, Food and Drug. OSHA, Occupational Safety. And SEC, the Securities and Exchange, that's stocks and bonds. All of them are different agencies. Most federal crimes go through the Department of Justice, and the investigative arm of the Department of Justice is typically the FBI, although some may go through the IRS or the Postal Service, believe it or not. Anything sent in the U.S. Post makes it a federal crime. State and locals can have some role, but most states are really hesitant to get involved in a lot of white-collar crime. Some states do, but most are hesitant. Part of that is because many states want to appear to be very pro-business, very much in favor of a positive business environment. If you have a lot of regulations on business to make sure that they're not stealing, you might have fewer businesses that are willing to relocate to your state. Also, a term that's often used is racketeering, and this is any criminal act involving some level of organization in the business environment. And the big piece of legislation that's used here is called RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act. It's a very, very major tool that's used. All right, that was a quickie. I wanted to finish it up for you. Have a good day.